Great to see you here, M. Mukundan. Wonderful to welcome you to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
I am so very pleased to hear that the book Delhi, a Soliloquy, which is, of course, the translation of a book that most Malayalis know very well, I think, the Delhi Gathagal, which has actually was published in Malayalam in 2011, has now emerged in a very good English translation and has been shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature. This is an opportunity for us to talk about the book, and I'm going to let you do much of the talking. What I wanted to start you off with was a very simple question. Why the subtitle? Why a soliloquy? A soliloquy is a monologue directed to oneself, and it's something which, when you have no one to address your thoughts to, you're speaking aloud to yourself. That's a soliloquy. Why is the novel a soliloquy?
Why the novel is so... You see, the novel, it's very close to my heart because everything I have written comes from my direct experience, from what I've seen or what I've heard of. So that is, in a sense, the novel, my experience. Of course, I have done some alchemy of fiction writing and added a lot of imagination to that. But basically, it is my experience, what I have seen. This is what means the novel to me.
Understood. Okay. And of course, in the context of the novel itself, I think those who read till the very end might get a sense of why you put that subtitle in. You are so extremely well known and well respected in Kerala as really a writer at the very forefront of our literature. You are, of course, better known as the illustrious son of Mahe, the only French colony in Kerala. You were raised by the Mahi River, and in fact, in your classic early novel, Mahi Pulude Thiyangalil, on the banks of the Mahi, you won a whole slew of numerous literary awards, and I think you were already from a fairly young age established in the front rank of contemporary Malayalam writers. What did it feel like to abandon the lush greenery of Mahe for the arid and soulless streets of the nation's capital in your book, Delhi?
Well, really, that's my story. I am like Sahadevan, the protagonist of the novel. Because in the early 60s, the unemployment was a big problem in Kerala.
Even today,
in those days, it was very acute, even today. But there's no other way. Get out of the place and go to some cities like Delhi or Bombay. But I had some advantage being from Mahe. I learned French. I speak French. So it's very, very easy. It's rather easy for me to get into the French embassy. That's how I landed there with a job in the embassy. I worked for over 36 years exactly. It's a long period. And what is surprising, I lived only 20 years in Mahe, my hometown where I was born and where I but in Delhi, 36 years, almost the double. So it's a long period. And
so actually,
please. No,
I hear you. I was going to say, actually, in fact, Delhi is a more, shall we say, appropriate subject to reflect your own experience and your own years in the capital. And therefore, the subject of Delhi in the novel is perhaps more appropriate than the Mahe for which you are better known, which is very interesting. Now, tell me, you have this wonderful thing at the beginning of the novel when the mother of 20-year-old Sahadevan arriving by train in Delhi is told, as soon as you reach Delhi, you should go to Nehru's house and meet him. Did your mother tell you that? Is that something that people expected? If you go to Delhi, you will go and meet Nehru?
That's what people think in a place like Mahe or in Kerala in those days. For them, Delhi is Jawaharlal Nehru. That's all. So all of them, they want, even my friends, they told me, you're lucky, you can see Nehru and Indira, both of them. So that's what means what is that Delhi means to them.
And did you ever meet either of them in all your 36 years?
No, I haven't met Pandit Nehru, but I have met Indira. Indira I have met. And Pandit Nehru once, when I was walking in Queensway, that is now Genpath. In those days, it was Queensway. I saw him, coming down from a car and walking to a cottage emporium without the usual, usually the prime minister, he can't move around like that, but he was all alone. He just walked to the museum. So now see how things have changed. And
Well, apart from security, which is such a major thing, there would also be mobs of selfie seekers. Everybody would come wanting a selfie on their mobile phone, so he couldn't do that for that reason. So you then take the story from the arrival of young Sahadevan and his immediate culture shock in seeing Delhi, how clean, how hungry Kerala was, and how frankly dirty Delhi was, the lack of social consciousness, everything that he had taken for granted in Kerala, which was not available in Delhi. And I have to say that it's quite remarkable that from that beginning, Sahadevan becomes an insider. How much of this is indeed the story of Sahadevan's evolution, and how much of it is really the story of Delhi's evolution? Is it too easy to say both?
No. You see what Sahadevan has felt, what I have felt already, he gave up his native place in search of a job, but it's a compulsion, it's no choice. So he landed there, and but gradually he became part of the city, and that is his second home, or even we can say that it's his first home, though he is from Kerala. In Kerala, as he said, everything is there, it's green, it's very clean, everything is there, but the jobs are not there. So in Delhi, you have jobs, but you lack certain other things. So it's a question of choice. But I find that there's no choice. So far as I am concerned, there wasn't any choice. I had to get out of the place in search of a job. So this is the same thing Sahadevan did, but he fell in love with the city in spite of its all the field, the poverty, violence. He became part of it. I felt so. In the beginning, I was disgusted, but in spite of all these shortcomings, I was in love with Delhi. When I left Delhi, after almost 40 years, I think I almost cried leaving Delhi. So even it's a difficult place, and when you live there for a long time, somehow you become part of it. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to Sahadevan.
At the same time, your novel is punctuated by the major historical events of that period. The war with China in 62, the two Indo-Pakistan wars of 65 and 71, the emergency of 75, and the Sikh riots of 84. So though it is very much a novel of an individual within the Malayali community of Delhi, the events are actually in many ways the force that drives this process forward. Or am I being unfair? I mean, I think in many ways the evolution of your characters is seen through the prism of these major historical events and their impact on the lives of the principal characters.
So, you see, in fact, I wanted to tell the story of the Malayali diaspora, the migrants, but in the same time, I wanted to place this story in a larger landscape. I mean, Delhi has got waves of history. It's all everywhere. It is everywhere. Wherever you walk, you come across historical memories. So we can't write without excluding historical events. So that is why I wanted to place the story of Sahadevan and the Malayalis in a larger context, in a larger landscape. And in fact, I wanted to say a lot of things, but these things I think I couldn't, because there are so many events. The list is there is so much, and it is beyond the scope of a novel. So what I did, I did, in fact, that was a process of elimination. You see, with one hand I wrote, with the other hand I cut. In one hand I had a pen, in my other hand I had a pair of scissors. So it is a process, writing and eliminating.
Right. Hemingway famously recommended that, if you write a sentence you're particularly proud of, go back and cut all the adjectives. And that, in some ways, I suppose you're saying take the history but leave out the details that are not so relevant to the character's development. But it's interesting, one of the things you eliminated are the, shall we say, the more successful side of the Malayalis of Delhi. You've got a lot of characters leading tough, difficult, challenging lives, a lot of unfortunates. There's no equivalent of a Krishna Menon, of a KPS Menon, or a TK Nair, or Madhavan Gutti in journalism, or a BJ Burgess in journalism, or a George Muthoot in business. These big Malayali names who have succeeded in the national capital are neither mentioned nor fictionally reinvented. Is it that their stories don't interest you? Why have you only focused on a certain underclass? As a story of the Malayali community in Delhi.
They are well known, they are famous people, most of them. So I didn't want to write about famous people. I wanted to write about people at large. See, the poor people and starving people. Nobody knows them. That's why. If I wrote about people who made it to the top of their life, the novel's mood, it will change.
Just as you have the first character who offers Sahadevan a job, Gulshan Wadhwa, goes from being a barely making ends meet forwarding agent to a millionaire who can afford to give one of his daughters a Mercedes-Benz as a dowry. Is it not a fair argument that a portrait of the Malayalis of Delhi would need to include one major powerful bureaucrat or minister and one very successful businessman? Because those two kinds of Malayalis are not portrayed at all in the book. I mean, that's the question. Now, you partly answered it, but I'm not sure you fully answered it. You want to focus on those who are unknown, and you've created wonderful, very memorable, moving characters. But knowing your talent, you could have created also a very memorable version of a successful Malayali. But you haven't done so in this book, and I'm curious as to why.
Because novel has got background music. That is very sad music, dark, somber music. So I didn't want to rupture that music. I didn't want to put any successful person in that. This Gulshan Wadhwa, I needed him. Because Sahadevan works with him, and it shows the contrast, and it shows that how this in Delhi, the new rich people, see what they are, how they made it to the top. So that way, I could not eliminate him. So I told you I eliminated a lot of things, but I couldn't eliminate him because I needed him. Without him, I cannot highlight Sahadevan, his life. And he also, it shows a contrast, Gulshan Wadhwa and Sahadevan. Sahadevan could have done the same thing, in fact. He could have done the same thing. Because both of them, they are in this same job, the clearing agency. But Sahadevan didn't do it.
That's right. I mean, I must say that you could hear that somber music, but there are some amazing passages in the music because you have a talent for unveiling you into the lives of your characters with telling details, and the way in which you so feelingly portray the concerns and struggles of your ordinary lower middle class characters. The detail is what makes the novel so unusual. The college going girl whose footwear is tattered and frequently mended, the office girl wearing the same shirt day after day because that's all he can afford, the Sikh carpenter who cannot save enough for a dowry for his daughters, the pavement barber whose livelihood is destroyed in an emergency cleanup drive, or for that matter, the young woman whose widowhood and poverty lead men to assume she must be available for the night. All of these are just amazingly well observed, and I'm wondering how much of this have you yourself noticed while living in Delhi in those years, and how much of it is straight out of your imagination?
At least 15, 20 years, that was a gestation period. And then usually a novel doesn't come up in mind as a whole. The novel comes up in mind in fragments. Sometimes it's a place, or sometimes it's a character. So it's all, everything is mixed up. So then there was a pressure from within me to asking me to write, but I won't write like that. I thought I should wait. So I waited for more than 25 years or even 30 years. Then I started writing. By the time I couldn't help it. I had to write because all these characters, they started screaming from within my head, so write about us. So I had to pull them out. So that was the compulsion. I had no other choice. So usually I write like that. You see, when the pressure builds up and I can't withstand it, then really I start writing.
That's wonderfully said.
This
That's
novel is
wonderful.
written the same way.
That's wonderfully said. I mean, the sad music, I mean, there's a chronic consciousness of the
Yeah.
fragility of life pervading the novel. I was startled by the number of deaths that frequently occur in the novel. A large number of characters, both minor and major, die in the book. Of course, many die off stage, and you don't go into the details of their grisly endings. Is this something that you would have written about earlier? I mean, is death, because I don't remember death being so omnipresent in some of your earlier books, and I'm just curious about now that you and I have reached a certain age, you're even a bit older than I am, you might probably feel perhaps that you're seeing a lot more death around you of friends and known ones. Is this why that comes up too?
Yeah, in fact, that it's a subject I'm obsessed with. In fact, right from my young age, death, it intrigued me, and I couldn't comprehend it. I have given a lot of thought to it. Even in my first novel, On the Banks of Mayeji, all the characters disappeared and one by one. But I put them, in a myth because there's a saying in Mahe that all the people when they die they return to that there's a cluster of rocks in the sea. So all these people after death they return to the cluster of rocks and they live there as dragonflies, and so that is the same. That's a myth. People. Uh, in fact, that's the way all the characters one by one they go back to the cluster of rocks, what we call Velliyankal, the silvery rocks. That is the abode of souls. So, most of the novels I have.
It is. Well, I don't want to explore it too much because we're going to find out the hard way what it's all about, I'm sure. But I'm also curious about one more thing. You have obviously seen the city transforming itself from a place of wheat and cauliflower fields into the rather scarred megapolis that it has become today.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I did nonetheless observe that that this is not a book that the tourism department of Delhi would be happy to widely put out, because there's an unsparingly strong portrait of the city, which I must say is unsparing in the seamy side of life. The smells, the dust, the dirt, the omnipresent excreta, the injustices, the daily horrors that make the very challenge of survival for the city's residents such an ordeal. Was life that tough for most of the people you knew? I know you were in the French embassy as a cultural attaché. When you and I met first, we went on a tour of France together, so I know that your French is impeccable. But for those who were not similarly blessed in the Malayali community, was what you described really the daily experience of most people? It does not paint a very attractive or inviting picture of our nation's capital.
In fact, nobody believed that when I said the southern border of the city was Andrusganj or Mulchand Hospital, where this the cauliflower fields were there. But that is true, but nobody believes it. But when I came to Delhi in the early 60s, these fields were there. I used to have a walk there, see. But then all of a sudden everything changed. everything changed. I think this building mafia, they are, that is the buildings on one side, and the other side, all sort of this, juggies they started coming up. So that's what happened. And when within the city there were villages like Kotla, Mubarakpur. It's a village that is really within the city. It's a unique place. You have a city, and within the city you have villages. You have the fields. That's very interesting. But everything disappeared. That's very sad. But it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Everything has to change. If the cauliflower field remains the cauliflower field all the time, it's not interesting. So it should get destroyed and something else should come in place of it. Well, that's what happened.
What did you think about the translation? Did the translators connect with you? Because after all, you do know the language that they're translating into. Therefore, did they seek your guidance? Did you intervene in some of the translation process?
In fact, they started translating, and regularly they consulted me whenever they had any doubt. They asked me, called me, or send me email. So, and they also know they wanted to check if there is any factual errors. But so we worked together, all the three, and I'm very happy with the translation. And Fatima, she's from my place, from Mahe, so she is familiar with my language. And Nandakumar is also very good at English, so both of them, they made a very good translation. And not only
I'm familiar.
All the reviews.
Yes, the reviews have talked about that. I must say that I am familiar with Nandakumar's translation. I don't know Fatima quite as well, but the novel does not read like a translation. But in this novel, you have the literary flourishes rather few and far between. So the prose flows fluidly. And that's quite striking. I must say, since we have a bit of an audio issue, I think I'll try and end the conversation there, because you have laid out enough to whet the appetite of the listeners. M. Mukundan is an author who has won multiple awards, including the Ezhuthachan Puraskaram, which is the Kerala government's highest literary honor. He's a former head of the Kerala Sahitya Academy, and he has written in Delhi a soliloquy, a considerable book whose physical heft, it's a fairly substantial work of, I can tell you right now, 537 pages, but its physical heft is justified by the weight of its ambitions. I would recommend it very strongly, and as a portrait of our capital city over 4 eventful decades, and particularly of the diaspora Malayali community within it, Delhi a soliloquy has no equals. So I'd like to wish you all the very best for the JCB Literature Prize, for which you've been shortlisted. I commend this English language version to non-Malayalam educated readers everywhere, because it's a compelling, absorbing read by a master storyteller at the height of his powers. Thank you very much for joining us, M. Mukundan. All the very best. Good luck.
Thank you.
Jai Hind.